So once again, good evening or good morning or whatever part of the world you're in. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Friendly Circle Berlin Monday workshop. And today's workshop is entitled Enneagram Empowered Recovery, The Alchemy of the Enneagram in Transforming Addiction with Michael Naylor. And this workshop is for Michael will present an exploration of the power and potential of the Enneagram to support recovery from any addiction, to develop compassion for self and others, and to become mindfully aware of the particular Enneagram personality pattern that abides in your type structure and how to navigate them skillfully. You can learn a lot more about Michael and the wonderful work he does on his Enneagram channel on YouTube. We'll post a link to that. Michael is the director of the main Enneagram Center for Transformation and Wellbeing. By profession, he's a professional change coach, Enneagram Institute teacher, and a licensed addiction therapist and clinical supervisor. And we'll put all the information and links to Michael's information in the chat during the meeting. So with that, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate you coming along and giving us your time today. Thank you. And it's been wonderful getting to know you as well. So thank you very much. There you go.
Alrighty. So, hello, everyone. It's remarkable to me that there are 140 participants out there, and which is amazing. So, that said, I'll introduce what my experience has been with the Enneagram. Just starting with I've been in recovery 42 years, and it was around year 14 or 15 that I was working with a therapist, and my life had hit a nuclear landmine, and I was aware that even though I'd been sober 14 and 15 years and really been working a program, that I still suffered a lot, and it just seemed mysterious to me. And so he said to me, "Well, Michael, why don't you read that book, Personality Types by Don Riso?" And he said, "Look at the type 4. And in the Enneagram work, there's 9 types. And I read the type 4, and I was actually pretty horrified that Don Riso had described my inner world, and what I had sort of taken pride in was actually the things that were causing me all the suffering. And he named my demons with such clarity. I was just unveiled. And it woke me up to my inner life and really seeing the psychological dynamics of my inner life that were unconsciously getting in the way of many of my successes and my ability to feel good about myself, my capacity to feel comfortable in my own skin, my ability to, develop and nurture a relationship. So at that point, I dove in, and my hope was, after Don Riso had laid out the map of my the design of my own particular unique neuroses, that I should be able to get this handled in about 2 weeks. I mean, there it is. It's right in front of me. And little did I realize that I would have to slowly but surely unpack these patterns. That it was one thing to know about them in my head, like, oh, this is the pattern of the type 4. It was another thing to begin to embody them and feel them in the moment and actually have choices over how I was going to respond to crisis or whatever was in front of me. So I was immediately humbled, and my mentor at that time said, change is slow, and like we can say in the program, it's 4 steps forward, 3 steps back. You don't get to the mountaintop quickly, and you can't do it alone. And one of the things, that certainly we understand in AA is this idea that, doing spiritual work alone isn't difficult, it's impossible. And so part of my work was to find other groups that were aware of the types who could begin to support me in noticing my own patterns, because one of the things I discovered was the ones that were the most unhealthy or unbecoming or stop me from connecting with people on the level that I wish for. But those particular behaviors were the ones precisely that I couldn't see when I was doing them. So, we talk about this when we look at the Enneagram, that there's 9 levels of health, and that most of our patterns that are unconscious are hanging out around level 5. And the mistake I made many times was that when I was going down the levels and being more unconscious, is I thought that I was actually getting healthier while everybody else was messed up. And so part of the work for me was to learn to notice when I was dissolving into unconscious patterns that I had heretofore assumed were okay. And that took a good deal of work and support from people around me to begin to see how quick and fast unconscious patterns could take over and speak through me as though it were the truth. So one of the things I really appreciated about Bill W. Was when he wrote, I think it's in As Bill Sees It, that that AA is a spiritual kindergarten. And what I had learned over time, since I've been a therapist throughout my recovery, is I began to notice that people, with short-term recovery often relapsed, but also I was just shocked at how many people, when they hit year 15, 20, 25, would disappear and would relapse. And I kept thinking, like, what is going on here? And it occurred to me that what happens is that people, as they do 12-step work, they actually prepare themselves to be able to look into the depths and begin to encounter things that are unconscious, trauma, etc., delusions that they acquired as a little one, and that many of them were ill-equipped for what to do when they met these particular inner challenges, ghosts, psychological suffering. And so part of my work became then to try to communicate about this to people in recovery, which is why I wrote my book, The Alchemy of the Enneagram, which is to try to create some awareness around what are the kinds of things that people aren't prepared for that are going to be innate triggers that are going to get triggered as they stay sober and they develop a more honest life and become more sincere, that those kind of, you could say, the shadow part of a person or just the unconscious part is going to get revealed more and more. And when it happens, it's not going to feel particularly good. And what I noticed is that sometimes the solution when people would hit these kind of psychological swamps is they would be encouraged to go to more meetings and sponsor more people and work the steps 8, 9, 10 times, but it didn't touch this material. It really required a deeper inquiry technique around self-awareness that often related exactly to the type structures that they had inherited and the type struggles that they inherited as a little one. So with the Enneagram, most people feel like the pattern of the type is inherent to little boys and little girls. They're born with it. And depending on their level of health of their families, they are either able to access the gifts of the type, or if they've gone through a lot of trauma, and everybody has some remnant of trauma in their life, then their defensive patterns will become a part of sort of their identity. They will learn how to protect themselves as little boys and little girls because they need to survive. And then when they become adults, they may have that the grace of getting sober. And, sometimes there's like a pink cloud for 3 months to a year. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh my God, there's all this stuff going on inside me. And I'm angry and I'm jealous and I'm envious and I'm impatient and I feel terrible. And I don't know what to do with this stuff. Well, certainly work with other recovering people helps that. But there's often, I notice, a missing ingredient down the road that unless they begin to understand their type structure and how it operates, that it will get in the way of their progress to actually actualize and utilize the support around them. So I started working with the Enneagram 14 years into sobriety, and it was for me, a remarkable tool for going into deeper healing, and that guided me towards things like, breath work and yoga and Jungian therapy and deep meditation and body work and heart work, and all of it around beginning to heal those aspects of my being, which in the Enneagram world we say that we have 3 centers of intelligence: the gut, the heart, and the head center, and that the Enneagram is really about becoming able to specifically notice which of the centers are the ones that have developed the most unhealthy habits. So as I've journeyed along now, today I'm 42 years sober, which is miraculous for me. And I've been married now for 27 years. I've got 2 kids who are 28 and 31. And often just look back at that sort of serendipitous moment when my therapist said, read this book by Don Riso, and that it opened up a kind of window on my inner self that allowed me to begin to work more specifically with those traumas that that I'd experienced. So from there, it was probably about 6 years later that I met Don Riso and Russ Hudson, who were the leaders of the Enneagram Institute, and I began training with them. And within about 3 or 4 years, I was one of their faculty, one of their teachers, and started my own work as a teacher, therapist, coach in the Enneagram world, and have been doing that probably for the last 20 years. And all along the way, so many people have come to me who have sort of hit a stuck point in their recovery, and when they learn about their Enneagram type and the kinds of things that they can do, mindfulness practice, etc., that they start to move through those stuck points, and again start to expand and just experience deeper and richer aspects of reality. Ultimately, the purpose of the Enneagram is to really create the ground for each of us to understand that each person has a particular personality pattern, that as I learn to understand that pattern, my natural response to it will be to feel compassion for the challenge that everybody has, including myself. And so really the ultimate goal of the Enneagram is creating a kind of universal understanding around this idea, which is that when people are not acting their best, most of the time they actually think they are, and they can't see what they're doing. And that's the nature of an unconscious response. And you might just think of it yourself, how many moments have had where I get angry and then my wife says, "You're angry." I say, "I'm not angry. What are you talking about?" Or, what are those times when my daughter will say, "Gee, Dad, you look really sad today." And I'm not in touch with it. And I'll say, no, I'm fine. And then I walk in the other room, and then I sort of sense into my own heart. And I realize, wow, I am feeling really grief-stricken, and I'm, having a hard time accessing it. So the work of the Enneagram, as I understand it, is really to teach people how to develop really even more specific empathy for the suffering of other people and for their own particular suffering. And so as I learn to, one of the keys, of course, is learning self-observation. So when I started learning self-observation, which included a lot of meditation, they should have said something like, when you learn meditation, you're going to see every weird, strange thing inside of you that you thought didn't exist, and it's not going to cheer you up at first. But instead, what's the advertisement? Do meditation and you'll be peaceful and blissful. Well, you will get there, but you will also notice that there are all sorts of alligators and snakes and unidentified flying psychological patterns inside of you that, as you learn to develop quiet mind, you see them. And actually, it's a bit horrifying at first. It's kind of like, when I first came into recovery and got sober, it was like somebody put a flashlight down in my basement, and I started to see all my stuff, all of my patterns. And then when I started working with the Enneagram, I discovered there's another floor beneath the first one I looked at, and was horrified once again at what was there. But it gave me an opportunity to start to bear witness to the real challenge we all have in transforming patterns, because some of the patterns can feel really, as my teacher would say, some of these patterns are immortal. You may have to apologize many times before you actually, are able to transform it. And I can remember talking to my Zen teacher about year 20. I said, I've been sober 20 years and I'm apologizing a lot more than I ever have in my life. And he says, well, would you like the good news or the bad news first? And I said, well, give me the bad news. He says, well, that's gonna get worse. The more aware you get, the more you'll realize how you're stomping on people's toes, and you'll start to see it, and you'll apologize more. He said, the good news is that you'll start to develop a heart of compassion for yourself and others, and realize that everybody is on the same level when it comes to transforming patterns that get in the way. So that was helpful and also discouraging, because I didn't expect to see more and more what I like to think of as unidentified flying psychological objects going through me, and myself responding to the world as if I had the lens on reality, only to learn that I didn't. So, you could call that delusion busting or melting down of illusions. But through it all, it really has felt like layer after layer of defenses that I acquired as a little guy have, just sort of been melting away. And, that when it comes to spiritual growth, my experience is that we are just at the beginning of exploring the depth of transformation that can occur for people. And, today, being 42 years sober, when I first came into recovery 42 years ago, there weren't many people floating around that even had 15 years. And now that people have been staying sober, sometimes for longer periods, they actually naturally open up to some new doorways of depth understanding for how to transform and expand. And one of the things that has always stood out to me is this principle that, you're either moving in the direction of growth or you're moving backwards. And I think there's, that's certainly one in this neck of the woods. I live in South Portland, Maine, and in recovery here, that's one that we use a lot. This idea that unless I'm moving in some way towards a new level of transformation, there's a way that my patterns have an inherent capacity to start moving me back towards my default. So, sometimes we notice this. I notice it, that this happens a lot. People come into recovery and they work in a program, and they start to get their families back, and they start to feel better, start to get jobs and working. And then for some reason, they stop doing the exact things that got them there. Whether it's counseling or meditation or AA meetings or talking to people. And that pattern of disengaging from what got you to a place of serenity is always in the background, waiting to sneak in some form or another. That's been my experience. And also, when I hit a new level of transformation that I've never been to before, often it's really important for me to have other men and women around me who have passed through a particular, I would call it a spiritual portal, where I'm dealing with new levels of understanding on an emotional level. For myself, I've had to do a lot of grief work over the years, which has included something called primal therapy, the Hoffman process, deep transformative breath work, because there was just a lot of sorrow and sadness that that inhabited me when I first came into recovery. And and sometimes I would notice if I was even bringing up this subject matter in a meeting, there would be old-timers who would get upset and say, we don't talk about our childhood pain here. And my reply would be, well, yes, I do, because I'm here to get sober, and I need to talk about what's important to me. So there would be a little bit of a sparring, and around this neck of the woods, there's quite a bit of openness to, the tools that help people get sober. You'll hear conversations about particular teachers, the Dalai Lama, Pema Chodron, Eckhart Tolle, things like that, Desmond Tutu. And when I first came into recovery, that was like off limits. You're only supposed to talk about the big book. And, in my own evolution, after 5 years of sobriety, one of the paths I took was a Buddhist path. and did that for probably 10 or 15 years until I came across something called the Gurdjieff work, which is, another form of Buddhism. And again, it's all really designed at helping me to see when I'm actually in reality and when I'm drifting away in some kind of fantasy about myself. So, the overall journey, certainly, as my teacher would say, is, the longer you're at this, the more you realize that on some level we're all fools. And that's not a bad thing. It's humbling, but we don't have to fight with each other because none of us is an enlightened being. We're just in process. And the Enneagram is a great tool for helping continue that nurturing of humility and also just really understanding the sorrow that other people have gone through. So that said, I'm just wondering if any questions are popping up. I took a big breath and laid a lot out there. I'd be glad to start hearing some questions and maybe go to my slides.
Okay, wonderful stuff, Michael. This is great. So we'll do if you want to do like a couple of questions now and
Yeah.
then go to slides. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we'll take two hands.
So, thank you, Michael. I'm so glad I made it to this session. Thank you, Patrick, for having him. So I've been studying the Enneagram now for a while. And when I first heard about it, somebody told me I was a type. And so I thought I was that type. And then that kind of threw me for a loop. And so the teachers have said, don't tell anybody what their type is and don't let them tell you what your type is. And so I followed that and I can understand that because in what I'm learning about all the types and I've taken like about 10 tests now. And so I can't decide which type I really am. 4 different types come up. So in your first 5 minutes, Michael, you said that Don Riso, who I think is like one of the main experts, told you what type you were. Could you make any comments on that?
Well, yeah, he said, I suggest you read this chapter and see what you discover. So he didn't say you're a type 4, because at the Enneagram Institute, we have always held that principle. Don't tell people what their type is because it robs them of their own journey to discover it. And you might be wrong. And if someone gives you the wrong type, it's going to slow down your process and your ability to work with the issues of the type. So what I always tell people is, number one, if they take an Enneagram test, don't believe the test, but look at the top 3 scores and do some reading on each of the types that were your top 3, and then you come to a decision yourself. Now, certainly one of the ways that can really speed this up is that if you have a beloved partner who you trust, they often can see your patterns easier than you can, and they can help assist you in discovering your type. Certainly, I wouldn't invite an enemy in to do this work because, these things can be used against you, right? And that's certainly one of the things people get concerned about is, if people know my type, are they going to use it against me? And, I think that's just something to be aware of. What we always say in our work, in the Enneagram work, is that my job is not to try to transform anybody else, but to work on myself, to mind my own business. We say in the program to take care of my side of the street and not to try to even get people to get interested in the Enneagram until they're ready for it, because there's a readiness that's important. And also, there are other things that people can do to transform. So it's not the only game in town. It's just one that I've found connects with all of the other paths that I've been interested in. But everybody has anybody who takes a sincere Christian path or Buddhist path or Sufi path is going to get to the heart of gold. And the Enneagram can assist that, certainly, but it's not necessary. It's a powerful tool, but fortunately, higher power has given us more than one powerful tool to work with. So.
And anybody asking a question at this point, let me know if you wanted to edit it out of the YouTube channel, because I'll have to let the editors know about that. I mean, we could disguise your faces and stuff like that, but the voice thing, and so just let me know. And then a lot of hands are shooting up all of a sudden, Michael, do you want to keep going past
Yeah.
what we? So please let me know about the editing because it'll be a process that we'll have to explain to our volunteer video editors. So if you don't want to be on the video, best to send me the question in the chat. There you go. You should be able to unmute now.
Hey, Michael, that was phenomenal, I have to say. You really
Awesome.
touched me, you did. And you made perfect sense to the whole journey. I studied a little bit of the Enneagram, and what I'm trying to say, can you see a bit of everything in you in that Enneagram?
Say that one more time.
Can you see a bit of everything in the nine? No, the way there's nine.
Yes.
Do you get to see a little bit of everybody in you? That's what I'm trying to.
Yes. Very good point. So even though I'm a type 4, I have bits and pieces of all the types, which in the beginning can make it confusing. But with a little deeper exploration and guidance, I realize that I have one pattern that tends to be my default, and but I have affinities with all the types. That's why it's great to study all the types, as you start to see your relationship with all the different types, and again acquire a sense of understanding and compassion for those types.
And I was going to ask you one more thing. That was brilliant what you says as well. That I remember doing the workshop, but we all had to share what we were for, what we a 1, a 2.
Yes.
And you're right about that. It is personal to yourself and your own inner journey. What because people can play on the emotions and they can, you have to be careful. What I'm trying to pick up from you, you have to be careful what information. That's what I'm picking
Well,
up that.
so what I would say is this, that so I teach a relationships workshop, right? Enneagram and so most everybody comes to the relationship workshop to change their partner. And I'll say, okay, good luck on that one. I tried to do that for 15 years. It never worked. If I have some power to change myself, that, as my teacher would say, Michael, your hands are actually full with yourself. You don't even have time to think about changing anybody else. So keep your attention on you and you'll have more to offer and you'll have a better life. But that's a really important distinction. And when I teach, let's say in corporate settings, which I don't do too often, it's not my favorite place, but people are really concerned. If you know my Enneagram type, are you going to use it against me when I'm having a difficult time in my work? And sometimes that happens. So, I think my principle is, it's not my job to change anyone, but to provide information that they can use if they want to. And to humbly admit that changing myself to be touched. So anyway, that's where I stand with it. So for those who are curious, this is the book. And this book I created, I have worked in the addiction field in a men's rehab and halfway house for probably 20 years, and it was through the accumulation of many, many moments with these men that I wrote the book, and really tried a lot of my work primarily has been with men, and I've done men's work for many years, running groups. And getting certainly the support of men in my life. I wouldn't be sober today without them. So anyway, that's where the source of the material came from. And then, so what we talk about in the Enneagram, just this is a simple graphic, but it's this idea that we have 3 centers of intelligence, and the gut center, the body center, is located in the red spot right around the belly button. And the kind of story on the body center is that, when you're really present in your body, I'm sure each one of you have had this experience where you have an intuition that comes right through your body. It's alive, and if you pay attention to it, it's often really a strong source of guidance. And, I can tell you how many times I would get an intuitive sense that I shouldn't really be working with a particular person. And my little head center, where that purple is, I'd go, oh no, this just couldn't be. I'm not going to trust this gut center. And then I would, get to be visited by hell and other sorts of afflictions. But when I listen to it, it's often very clear and strong. So part of the work, in the Enneagram is how do I begin to develop enough relaxation in my body, gentleness in my body, so that this center becomes a clearer source of wisdom and guidance. And that's all learnable. That's where yoga comes in. I start to do work with yoga and I start to stretch my body and loosen it. Then that particular center starts to become more vivid. Then the next center is the heart center, right in the middle of the chest, right around the sternum. And it's this idea that to the extent that I have undigested suffering, things I've gone through that really broke my heart, but I haven't expressed and healed, that my heart center doesn't work as intuitively as it potentially can. And that the more I do inner work on my heart center and the healing and the grieving and the anger work, that particular center also becomes a source of intelligence. And to me, that has something to do with this capacity to be able to feel on an intuitive level who's safe, who will be my friends. I can sense through my heart when someone's not speaking the truth to me, also through my gut. But this center becomes really important for my ability to actually access compassion for myself and to feel the suffering of others. So in the Enneagram work, we're talking about, all three of these centers need attention for healing. So the head center, where it's purple, to me, that has a great deal to do with the work I've had to do in therapy around beginning to notice what are the distorted beliefs I have about reality based on my interesting upbringing and also just living in the United States. I mean, if you're not crazy in 5 years in the United States, you're just not paying attention. But there's a lot of delusionary stuff floating through so many sources, and this isn't done intentionally, but part of the work I had to do was first learning how to develop quiet mind so that, I could sit and be here with you, and if I just needed to have a still place in my brain so I could just listen, I would have access to that. And as I developed more quiet mind, I also developed the ability to notice when, particular delusions were popping through, the movie screen of my mind. And so for myself, as a type 4, each type has sort of one thing that's a bit of an Achilles heel. So and we all have this one, but mine, I would call it envy. And envy is this interesting sense that I can be just sitting here in my office and look out the window, and someone is driving by in a car that I actually don't even care about, but I have this envy response where I feel like, oh, they have the good life and I don't. And whether on a conscious, I can sit out and go, I don't even like that car, but this envy movie is like a movie that comes into the theater of my mind. And I start watching this movie about how they have the good life and I have the bad life. And if I'm not awake and aware, I start to believe it. I start to feel miserable. I start to have hateful thoughts towards them. May you have a suffering death. That would cheer me up. And so I get lost in an illusion. And what I've learned over time, working with so many people, that, everyone is walking around with a broken heart in some form or another. But when this envy pattern, this movie pops up in my mind screen, it's the number one hit. I've watched this thing 10,000 times. And if I'm not paying attention, there I am, front seat, watching the movie and grinding my gears. And, with meditation and practice, I can go, whoa, wait a second. I have seen this maybe close to 12,000 times. I know what happens. I don't have to go there today, right? And so I can put it down. But that took a lot of work and noticing how often that pattern would just own me. So what we say in the Enneagram work, if you discover your type, you will notice a particular pattern that shows up probably every day, sometimes as a whisper, sometimes as a shout, but it'll be there. So the head center, or this little purple thing is around, in a sense, purifying my capacity to know what's objectively true and what's the part of an inherited movie I took in as a little one, or what's the part of a delusionary system that's in my culture that actually interferes with me with seeing with eyes of, clarity. So you have three centers, head, heart, and gut. And then let's see, what's next? It's this idea, the transformation practice, learning to observe yourself with radical compassion. What does that mean? For me, when I first started noticing the envy patterns, I have a little spiritual inner critic that says, oh, bad Michael, you should be past this years ago. What is your problem? You're having this envy thing. And then I would beat the crap out of myself. And my teachers would say, whatever you beat up inside of yourself, you strengthen its mechanism and its power to operate unconsciously. So it's not a bad idea to start to notice the pattern, but if you can, restrain the self-hatred. Observe it like a scientist, like, oh, there's that interesting envy pattern. That's the one that tortures me. Well, there it is, and I can feel it in my body, and I notice my head starts to create an imaginary story. I can feel my heart tighten, and I'm just observing it, and I'm not trying to change it. I'm just trying to observe with a bit of compassion. It's like, oh, what's it like to feel envy? Well, it doesn't feel good. It's heartbreaking. I feel like I have a sword thrown through my chest. So part of the work, a fundamental practice in all of this is how can I learn to observe my very interesting neurotic patterns without beating the crap out of myself when they activate, because they're much faster than my conscious mind, right? We say that with your Enneagram type, you begin to realize that your patterns have a mind of their own, and they don't care if you have lots of information about it. They just, when they come in, they just take off, and if you can notice them and bring kindness to it, and let's say I'm a certain type 3, we say as the achiever, the inspired champion, and type 3s are very success-oriented, and they have this little thing called vanity, right? And vanity is this little subtle psychological pattern that they developed as a little one to protect themselves, which says, I am like more awesome than most everyone. I can't help it, I apologize, but that's just how it is, right? And then as I begin to observe my vanity, I go, oh my God, look, what is that voice that has me thinking that I'm actually better than people, particularly because I don't even know them, but this kind of movie starts playing across my awareness that I'm like some kind of, hot shit person. And I start to feel grandiose and I get puffed up. And if I really sense into that, underneath it, I may notice that I feel empty, that there's nothing there for me to stand on. So to begin to observe this pattern, first I have to have enough kindness to not beat myself up for noticing, oh, here comes the envy movie. The vanity movie. Yes, I've watched this about 20,000 times, and I kind of like it. It cheers me up in the moment. But as I learn to sense it in my body and feel it in my heart, I realize that underneath it, it is a sense of being deeply inferior. And as I begin to work with that and feel that broken heart, I then start to feel a sense of equality with people, which is wonderful. I can connect now, I can be with people, and I'm not putting myself up or below them. So anyway, just again, pointing to a practice, which is how do I learn to observe my patterns and do it with a sense of kindness, equanimity, and non-attachment in many ways. So let's go to the next slide, see what we have. Not messing with myself, becoming a kind observer of my interesting neuroses. We say I free myself not by trying to be free, but by simply noticing how I'm imprisoning myself in the very moment I'm imprisoning myself. So again, it's like change comes through observing with compassion, as opposed to, in the beginning, if I notice a pattern, I would try to apply my will to it and change it inside of myself. Like, I'm going to just wrestle this thing down to the ground, duct tape it, and then I'll be done with it. And my teacher says, well, how's that working for you? I said, well, it's not working. The pattern keeps coming back. He says, well, when you try to change your patterns, understand this. That's the pattern actually trying to change itself. It doesn't work. But self-observation with kindness will begin to break the trance of that pattern. And that was hugely pivotal for me in terms of how to work with my own inner highway of neurotic material or distorted material. And again, none of these things are looked at as bad. All of our patterns, my patterns that I acquired as a little guy, I had to acquire to protect myself. And I think it's God's sense of humor that what saved you as a kid then becomes your trap when you become an adult. It's like, come on, God, what like this is backwards. We got to work with a better system next time. And I intend to have a conversation about that with this divine mystery. So what do we say about addiction? It's cunning, baffling, and powerful. And so are our patterns. Once you begin to see your patterns, you realize that they're smarter and quicker than you until you learn to see them and develop patience around them. So this is my inner critic, Voldemort. And one of the things we talk about with the Enneagram is everybody has a particular type of inner critic that when they begin to notice it, they can begin not to be taken by it. So, and this is where I worked for a good 15, 20 years. This is Serenity House. And there's a crowd of the guys. And then Bill Wilson, who we believe is a type 3. And he identifies ambition. True ambition is not what we thought it was. True ambition is a profound desire to live usefully and walk humbly under the grace of God. And my experience with the Enneagram as I become more intimate with my patterns and the people I work with who are working on themselves is it wakes up a deeper and deeper wish to help others. It's a source of inspiration. So something Bill Wilson used to say, words of wisdom, Bill, which really applies to the Enneagram, acceptance and faith are capable of producing 100% sobriety. In fact, they usually do, and they must, else we'd have no life at all. But the moment we carry these attitudes into our emotional problems, we find that only relative results are possible. And that's where the idea of emotional sobriety comes in. Getting sober sets the ground for me to start looking at this issue of emotional sobriety. So nobody can, for example, become completely free of anger, fear, and pride. Hence, in this life, we shall attain nothing like perfect humility and love. And of course, the longer you work on yourself, you begin to realize some of my patterns feel immortal. I have loads of library books in my head center describing a particular pattern, and it doesn't care. When it gets triggered, it just does what it does. So part of the work is, again, to kind of develop a humility around the challenge of changing some patterns. So we shall have to settle respecting most of our problems for a very gradual progress, punctuated sometimes by heavy setbacks. And that's the other thing that the Enneagram talks about, is that we're going to go through cycles of expansion. And then as we expand, we actually gain eyes to see what's undigested on a suffering level. And so if you work in a program, this pattern of expanding and then sort of going down into difficult material is going to go on for as long as you live. There's no perfected place where there's no more problems anymore. There's actually the farther you go along, sometimes the more challenging and painful are those deeper patterns that you have to navigate. So, if you know that in advance, you don't freak out and beat yourself up. Well, let me take a breath and see if there's some questions, and I'll come to the symbol and all of that. So, Patrick, I'm open for some more questions.
Thank you so much. I really sense your humility and gifting to us here. My question has to do with what made you choose the Enneagram out of all the other kind of instruments that are available to use, the Myers-Briggs, other indicators, and what do you think are the advantages of this? I do like how you've connected it to the 3 centers, and that seems maybe more of an evolution. But it's just where this wise choice from, and then where are you going next?
Okay. Well, when I first read about the Enneagram, Don Risso's book, I felt like this huge light had been thrown down into the cave of my soul, and all of a sudden I saw where everything came from. And it just, it was illuminating and shocking, but also incredibly, created incredible hope that somebody has walked this path before me. And a lot of people will say when they discover their Enneagram type and they read and they go, oh my God, I'm not the only one who goes through this. Oh, well, yeah, maybe 1 in every 9 persons on the planet goes through this, right? Depending on your type. So that inspired something in me that felt very real and hopeful, and it gave me some direction. Now, so part of the direction was this understanding that the more I was able to observe myself, the more of these sort of hidden patterns that had been irritating myself and everybody around me started to develop, started to lessen their capacity. So I actually became more usable friendly with people that I loved. And, if my daughter was here or my son, they'd say, thank God you got sober, but you also found the Enneagram, because you needed both of them to be the person you are today. So along with that, the Enneagram doesn't suggest necessarily what you need to do with the material that you discover. So for myself, it led me to finding things for healing my body center, massage therapy, craniosacral work for many years, yoga, which I do regularly now, to deal with my gut center and the body and being able to inhabit and take care of it. Jungian therapy and other different modalities for healing the heart, Hoffman process, the Landmark Foundation work, primal therapy, etc. And then, different variations of thinking center meditation, whether it's Zen or Shambhala Buddhism or Gurdjieff work. So for me, what it just sort of lit up a flame of truth that started to give me freedom and also bring me a sense of compassion for the things I kept bumping up against. And I realized, that most of the things that I had done that harmed people were things I truly didn't know better, didn't know how to do different until I learned about it. So there was room for huge compassion and realizing also, that other people, when they were doing things that I found offensive, were actually in the same place as me. They didn't know better. If they knew better, they would do better. And so that just deepened that sense of, you could say, forgiveness, seeing the fundamental goodness in everyone, understanding that on some level, really everyone does the best they can. And as I began to observe, using the Enneagram and the observation tools, how hard it was for me, with all the knowledge I had, to still, show up as an awake, objective person who could be compassionate, that was enough to drop me to my knees for many years. It was very humbling because I couldn't make myself learn quicker. I just had to bear with the process of unpacking a lot of distortion. So anyway, that just cheered me up. I mean, I think today it's just allowed me to just feel a kind of, I'd say, a loving tenderness towards everyone, and just feeling like I really belong with and to humanity, and I'm a member here, and it feels awesome. It's kind of like what we talk about in AA, becoming right-sized. And right-sized to me means, that I can actually commune with the person that's in front of me, regardless of their social status, that our common humanity is always alive. And for some reason, that just cheers me up, and I say, give me more of that. And so I'm headed, wherever this will take me, and just try to share the gifts I've been given, and appreciate this moment and this day, and I think the other thing that this builds in me is a trust that fundamentally human beings are good, and that I really feel like we're going to find a way through these difficult times that we're up against. And one of the reasons the Enneagram was brought to the United States through Gurdjieff was he said back in 1950 that around the year 2020, humanity will start to meet its shadow side, full bore. So hang on to your hats, do your inner work, become as conscious as you can be so that you might be able to contribute to the healing of the planet, and so that you won't be so shocked when you see all the shadows of everyone else popping up, and you'll be able to navigate it. So that's also been an inspiration for me, is this sense of really wanting to contribute to the evolution and making the planet a better place to live. So that was a lot of words. Did any of that make
Wonderful.
sense?
Wonderful. Do you want to keep going with questions?
Yeah. Let's do a
Yeah,
couple
okay.
more.
Thank you,
Okay.
Michael. Beautiful. Oh my God, Enneagram it's something that has been revealed by my higher power, some personality tests. I came from hard sciences. Everything is pretty new to me. And getting to know my type was like, wow. I thought I was an alien. And then there is this type that described me so beautifully. What I've been
Well, wait, let
struggling,
me stop you for just. What is your type?
it's type 5. For
Oh
a
boy.
woman, it's terrible. What I could see is that, especially from my workplace, my type has a very hard time with types 8. But this is the arrow of growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, well, I need to get more like characteristics for type 8, but it sounds well. And then I started to read, and then everything was like, it was like very meaningful to me. But I was like struggling because I could see myself again trying to change myself to something that I thought it was like, it wasn't me. And then coming to 12 steps, and I have this step 11 that tells me praying to higher power for the knowledge to his will to me, only for his will to me. And then I feel like, oh my God, should I be more aggressive and like conflict, like liking more conflict because I hate conflict, and this is hard for me in front of a type 8? Or maybe should higher power has this will to me? I mean, like, I don't know. I don't know what's higher power's will, or if I could, work through Enneagram suggestions. I would love to hear your thoughts about that, because I pick myself again trying to control,
Of course. Well, the challenge with the higher power is that rarely does he send a letter that is explicit about what to do, right? So it's like, okay, we're in this mystery. But for the type 5, the investigator, sometimes called the kind wizard, they're very busy in their thinking and analyzing and scientifically speculating, etc. So we say that their center of gravity tends to be in their thinking center, and where they tend to be absent is in their body. Sometimes type 5s will say, it feels like my body is a taxi cab for my head. And, and it just takes me places, but where I live is up here in this library of my mind. And, with the arrow going to 8 is a type that embodies and lives in their body. They feel it, that kind of animal soul. 8s are like, rah, here I am, And so, of course, 5s go, oh my God, I'm going to get blown away and devoured by the dragon. But there's a counterintuitive and sort of subtle way of starting to take in more gut-centered capacity, and that has something to do with learning to sense your body. And that's a whole practice that, I'd be glad to share with you down the road. But it isn't about sort of acting tougher or being tougher, because that's kind of like me trying to pretend to be an 8. But it's really around an internal change where you actually start to feel your innate power and start to feel that rise up inside of you and through your spine. And so then you start to actually be able to live it rather than trying to be some idea you have of what an 8 looks like. So that's a longer story. And certainly, I do a lot of coaching with the types, so that's, and I'd be glad to point you towards different information, but it's all learnable. That's the good news.
Oh, Michael, I just want to tell you, it is such an honor to hear your description of how the psyche and the heart and the soul work together. Your words are poetry. I can't write fast enough, but I ordered your book, so at least I can have that. As a 4 who finally understood, oh my God, there's a roadmap to my insanity, and there's a cure, at least, that will help me in this human form. When I say cure, I feel when I listen to you talk like I am in the presence of a very, very highly educated doctor who knows the medicine for the types. That's the gift, because we can really beat ourselves up fours and elsewhere, whatever, about I didn't do it quite enough to understand how to help myself. And I could do a million fourth steps and I can beat myself up and feel ashamed. And self-hate gets me nowhere but into the gutter, and as a recovered bulimic, I was trying to perfect my way into feeling good enough. That didn't work.
Yes.
And I loved when you said, the patterns, we're not even capable necessarily of like brain surgery, our patterns to health. There's got to be some higher power, some surrender, and all the spiritual practices I've ever been interested in are the ones you've been mentioning.
Awesome.
And I don't know much about Gurdjieff, and I would love for you to expound on that a bit, but I'm in awe of how you present this information. And I feel like you're literally getting one's number is such a gift, because it's a bit like seeing your blueprints and like your higher power saying, well, honey, this is how I made you. So you are going to struggle. So we're all like little Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts all on a journey. Yet my compass is a little different from your compass. And when I know that, I don't have to hate other people that say, that's not what my compass says. And it's like, well, because you're a number so-and-so. Anyway, it helps me be more compassionate as I sit here and listen to you about all the troubles I've had just under this household with this person I love that I married. But there's trouble because we're not the same number. I didn't marry myself. Shocker. I didn't marry. I love hearing how you gently talk about you being a 4. And I relate to that feeling of, I didn't feel like I was ever enough. I needed something else outside of me to make me feel enough. And then I realized my motto from Cheryl in the workshops we've been doing is, I have everything I need for my spiritual journey. That feels like balm honey to my heart that never felt like enough. And I do know that my higher power thinks I'm pretty special, and like you all too, but I need to know that specific thing. Like my higher power calls me blessed. I'm okay. Thank you so much.
And it's, the thing that, just a couple of things that come to mind is that, when I first started, type 4s are actually sort of overly astute at noticing what's messed up in them, right? They have almost like a deeper lens, and they go, oh my God, there's a lot of shit in here. And there's a lot of shit in you, but you don't even notice it. I could help you out with that if you just let me, come in and jump you with my ideas. But in the meantime, the type 4 can really be susceptible to a great deal of self-hatred, because they have a way of not being able to edit what's going on inside, and then their inner critic gets loud and self-hatred, goes off the rails. And one of the things that really helped me a lot was my teacher said, okay, Michael, you're in a state of self-pity right now. That's not a problem, really. So you didn't create the pattern of self-pity. That's something you acquired as a little guy. So all of your patterns that you hate yourself for were not your choice. You didn't choose to be embodying the neurotic parts of the type 4. They were things that you developed to protect yourself against, challenges, hurts, humiliations as a little boy or little girl. So I want to invite you to begin to see your patterns as not you. They're like artificial representations of your deeper self. And if you can begin to notice, or at least be more gentle with yourself when a particular pattern shows up, maybe it's explosive anger, maybe it's envy, jealousy, maybe it's, whatever it might be for your particular type. And I know as a type 4, for me, that even noticing, I'm in a state of self-hatred right now, and noticing that's even a pattern, that's not even really me. And the more I could begin to detach and become an observer of the patterns, my teacher would say, well, just notice the stream that's flowing through you. Right now, in this moment, there's a stream of self-pity. It's just streaming through you. It's not you. It's just something that's coming through you. And can you touch it that way with a kind of compassion and let go of your improvement project? And for myself, when I'd see a flaw, I think, oh my God, I got to change that thing. And I would just try to, grab it and tackle it. And, and you see this sometimes in program 2, there's this idea that somehow one day I won't have any anger. Well, good luck on that one. maybe really what I need to do is develop a kind of compassion for my anger, and certainly apologize if I've hurt people, but not to overly beat myself up, and just keep practicing compassion for myself and others, and that anger will, will become less volatile over time. So anyway, really appreciated what you said. And
Please.
okay, I want to do a couple more slides because someone asked for a look at the 9 types, but just a short kind of history. This guy named Gurdjieff discovered the Enneagram in Afghanistan. Nobody knows where it came from, but that it dates back to 2500 BC. There's one of my friends, colleagues, and teachers, Russ Hudson, does a trip to Egypt every year, going down into the depths of the pyramids. And what he has discovered is that the 9 types are everywhere in their artwork. It was a part of their whole philosophy. And he'll have a book coming out, but it's the idea that there was a period of time in Egypt when it actually was dedicated to helping people become conscious. And the 9 types in different forms were there, and they even built buildings that sort of supported the 9 energies. So that said, Ennea is Greek for 9, and gram is model. So this is right here is the glyph, and around it there are these points, which I'm going to talk a little bit about as I go forward. And this is Mr. Gurdjieff, and point 9 is at the top, and then we go around all the way around 9, 1 through 8. And he was a type 8. So let me see what's coming up here. Let me just get that one. Okay, here. So one of the things we talk about, the graphic itself. The circle, excuse me, represents words like presence, conscious awareness, essence, God, spirit, the divine, the great mystery. I like the term the holy wow. But the circle is representative of what occurs when people become conscious in all 3 centers. So let's just take a look at the triangle, which talks about the centers. And we call this the law of 3. And with the law of 3, we talk about the instinctual center, which the point is located at 9, as the awakened instinctual center, meaning that there's consciousness in my body. This point 3 down here is the awakened heart center, and the point right here on the left is the awakened head center. And so when a person comes into alignment in all 3 centers, then the circle comes online. Now this is the story, right? You're probably not going to have experience of this, but I know as the healthier I am, the sense of just feeling a quality of oneness with people is what I appreciate the most about inner work. So then we have this thing called the hexad. And the hexad is this funky little figure in the middle of it. And we call this the glyph for transformation. And it's this idea that we have an opportunity to either be moving in the direction of growth, and that if we stop moving in the direction of growth, that we start naturally to move backwards, and that there are cycles of growth. So the way I see this is in my recovery, when I start not evolving, and evolving can mean a number of things for me. It can mean going towards my wish for creative expression, my wish for deeper intimacy, my wish for better relationship with my kids, my wish to get comfortable with groups, whatever is there for me. And the conversation is that when you start to move in the direction of something you really want, that you will naturally encounter within yourself the opposite force. So it's like, in the Gurdjieff work, they talk about the affirming force. The affirming force is, okay, I'm Michael, and I want to develop the capacity to show up for my creativity, my writing, what I care about. So that's the affirming force. And then the opposite force is the denying force. And that force says, I just want to sit on the couch and watch Netflix and sink into some comfortable fantasy. And so there's a part of me that wants nothing to do with the spiritual goal. And so then the challenge is, how do I reconcile that? And so I notice, as I've gone along in my own journey, that about every third year I'll hit some new resistance, something in me that wants nothing to do with the next level of growth, whether it's going into more joy, whether it's going into feeling more deeply my suffering. But that cutting edge of transformation, I always, about every 3 or 4 years, I'll meet a roadblock. And when I meet that roadblock, I realize that the denying force is rearing its head, and that's when I reach out for another level of health for people around me who are farther along the path. And they, in a sense, provide me guidance to move through the next sort of mystery of my being. So you have that, the hexad. We say, a recovery principle, you go or you go, you grow or you go, which we talk about a lot here in the main language of recovery. And then let's see, I think I want to just get a graphic up here with the types on it. And for some reason, it's eluding me. Here we go. So someone asked about the types, and I'll just briefly describe them. We have the type 1 is the merciful teacher and the reformer, and they tend to have a strong motivation for perfection and not making errors. And when they're in stress, etc., they tend to be harsh on themselves and others. When they're in a good place, they're very merciful and great teachers. And then we have point 2 is the intuitive healer or the helper. They're a strong feeling type who really loves giving and being generous and helping people who are suffering. And when they're in a less healthy place, they are candidates for Al-Anon, right? So because they become helpaholics and they give too much. And I always tell people when they come into recovery, if you're coming into AA, you better be landing your butt in Al-Anon also, because you're hanging out with a lot of alcoholics. And if you're a type 2, you're going to start giving yourself away and not pay attention to your own recovery. Then the 3 is the achiever, the inspiring champion. And they're ones who have an intuitive sense of the gifts they've inherited, and they have a love of polishing them and expressing them and bringing success to the gifts they've been given. And when they're healthy, they inspire other people to do that. When they're less healthy, they protect their broken heart by being vain and arrogant and, sort of boasting. The type 4, the creative alchemist, the individualist, and we say that type is the one most inclined towards understanding themselves at depth, their emotional depth, their psychological depth, and at their best, their ability to develop works of creative expression that express the universal suffering of people. And they have a strong wish to really find out, what is it that, their higher power uniquely wants from them. And when they're healthy, they're buoyant, they're joyful, they're funny, they're creative, and they inspire other people to be their own individual self too. But when they're less healthy, they tend to feel like they're outsiders, that nobody gets them, and that somehow that they're flawed. So there's always a range of health on each of the types. So the type 5, which we had one person identify herself as, is the investigator or the kind wizard. And type 5s have a strong curiosity around figuring out what's real and true. And we, what's really the truth here behind the cultural conventions that sort of tell us this is what reality is. The type 5s are often digging underneath and, really asking that question, what's real and true? And I love to study and research and find out what it is. And there's people like Einstein, who's a type 5, and who was that one guy, Stephen Hawking, a type 5. And they're not all scientists, although if you go to the software world, you'll find a lot of 5s hanging out there. And then you have the type 6, which you call the courageous pathfinder or the loyalist. And this particular type is really oriented towards service, towards other people, as are the type 1s. And the type 6 has this sense of really wishing to find something they can deeply commit to and really become involved in. And they're also, when we talk about the pathfinder, it's like there's this sort of karma they have around being someone who is naturally fearful, who has to learn how to take on courageous roles. So one of the stories that we use to identify type 6 energy is a Lord of the Rings, and Samwise Gamgee, who was sort of like, carried Frodo on his shoulders all the way to the mines of Mordor to get rid of the damn ring, right? And all the way along, Samwise is tremulous and worried, and then picking them up and going past the monsters, the Balrog or the spiders, or whatever was there. So there's a kind of archetype for the type 6 that has this as a part of their path. And then the 7 is the joyful visionary, the enthusiast. And we say sometimes that 7s have just a natural ability to feel causeless joy. So there's people that embody these types quite well. One is Robin Williams, Jim Carrey, have this capacity for comedy, for spontaneity, for kind of fast-moving storytelling. And when they're healthy, they bring joy to everybody. They lift them up. They have this deep heart wish to bring joy and hope to people. Sometimes we call them the hope bringer. When they're less healthy and they're feeling a sense of not being loved, this kind of energy can be used in service of becoming really, I would say, almost like a hummingbird that's just hungry for some kind of experience, and they can't settle down, and there's a kind of shallowness that starts to show up in their life. And then the 8 is the challenger or the lion-hearted protector. And the type 8 is known for having a naturally powerful, courageous spirit, a kind of robust energy that's just brimming inside of them. And when they're healthy, they're leaders, they empower people, they love to bring out the courage in other people. They're very powerful encouragers. And really, think of Martin Luther King as being one person, Oscar Schindler from Schindler's List, type 8. If you're watching the Olympics, LeBron James is a mighty type 8. He's 39 years old, and he's the best player out on the court in the Olympics, and he's just a powerhouse. But he also spends a great deal of time bringing opportunities to the communities he grew up in Chicago, Akron, and creating camps for kids and really trying to empower them in the way that he wasn't as a kid. And when the type 8's not healthy, they can kind of be an annihilator. It's like they're the boss. You either follow their way or, say goodbye to your life. There's a sense of misusing power. And then the 9 is the peacemaker. And what we say about the type 9 is they have this natural, easygoing way of delivering unconditional kindness and safety to people. So I think of one of my favorites is, again, this is an American figure, which is Fred Rogers, who is such a gentle, kind man working with children and really trying to empower them through unconditional kindness and really encouraging them and making space for them to feel safe. And at the very best, that's what the peacemaker does. So that could be the quickest decision of the quickest descriptions of the type I've ever done. So I'm ready for some more questions.
Wonderful, great, thank you. So we'll go right back. I want to give a chat question a chance after the next question, so I'll look up the chat after the next hand.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much. I'm an alcoholic, and I also qualify for Al-Anon and other things. And thank you so much for mentioning the patterns.
You're welcome.
I like to be honest, and I'm going through a pattern of the same old rubbish. And what I find interesting is my gut health and my weight is really suffering at the minute. It's the same old junk coming up, even in my new life, of kind of a mixture of this old resentment, a bit of self-pity, some hatred, all these horrible things that I don't like to feel. And it is, I loved what you were talking about, and I made some notes and what I want to try and do. I also love history and symbolism, and you mentioned Egypt, and that was one of the places I saw in my awakening. I wanted to ask you, how can I encompass this, the pattern that I'm in, that I'm trying to break, even working with others and being honest with a few people that I work with around me and praying and meditating it's like there's something trapped in me. It's not moving. I don't feel too well. I am even going for MBT therapy. Oh God, that would have to do that. The question I'm asking, sorry, if I can get to the point, is I also feel trapped energy. How can I synchronize this Enneagram with my program and to try and make progress, because I've been trapped since a sickness of a virus about 5 weeks ago, and I'm literally trying to pull myself out. And the more I try, like you say, there's this opposing force, and it's even getting in the way of my university work. I feel numb, not numb, but just spaced, just gone. And I just feel so off. How can I learn more about this and encompass it in the 12-step program? And does the gut thing make sense, the weight gain?
Well, so just a short response, because this really requires a deeper answer. But if you get a hold, let's say, if you have access to this book, one of the things I do with each type is I give suggestions, practices people can do that start to help them penetrate the trance of their type. So this book, there's another book that's really awesome, which is called The Wisdom of the Enneagram. But doing the reading, so you start to understand sort of the architecture of your type, will begin to give you a place to, again, to apply compassion around the patterns. Because, when you're stuck in a pattern and it's kicking your butt, which is what patterns do, how do I make peace with powerlessness? I can't make myself get better. What can I do that creates the ground for me to be transformed through spirit or through the help of others? And I'm also one that believes deeply that my capacity to access my own depth of well-being also comes through the many people who love me. That if I'm not receptive to receiving love and kindness, and I'm pushing it away all the time, that source of love from other people, to me, is what has woken up my soul more than anything I've done. So sometimes we hear a story like, you can't love anybody else until you love yourself. And I say, that's not really true for me. I didn't learn to love myself until other people had loved me enough, and I began to believe it. So there's more than one way into the heart and soul. So I would just say, in the short term, to maybe try to get clear on your type and start to do some reading. And then, if other questions come up, just send me an email or notice if there's any workshops around you that might serve your understanding. And just ultimately, it's like, how do you sit with this struggle and this pain without beating yourself up? That's the first doorway. And, I hear that you have an inner critic that probably pounds on you a lot. And so, part of the work is working with a counselor so that you begin to see that and not be taken by it so much.
And somebody is struggling with, what you mentioned, living in America and not going crazy. So, yeah. And I mean, how do we deal with letting go and letting God in that situation? I mean, that's a big question. I don't know.
It is a big question. And what I draw on is, different people like Pema Chodron or the Gurdjieff work that talks about that even though we are seeing higher levels of distorted human beings who have not, as Richard Rohr would say, have no conscious inner life. Like I just say that if you're familiar with Richard Rohr, a remarkable man, and type 1, I think he's a Dominican or Benedictine priest, and but he's studied in depth all of the spiritual paths and sees a unity in all of them. And I was at one of his retreats in October, a 6-day retreat for men, which was about really healing, emotional trauma that you took in as a little guy. And through a variety of different techniques, just being with a group of men who were really oriented towards opening up to compassion And it was incredibly powerful. And at the end of it, Richard Rohr said that he started men's work 25 years ago around internationally. He's really a leader of groups all over the planet. He said, the problem is that most of the men who are in leadership roles don't have an inner life. They're not conscious. They're not able to feel the suffering they're causing. They can't feel their own suffering. So the only way they feed pleasure is through external reward, accomplishment, money gathering, etc. And he said, I started this men's work because my hope was enough men would develop an inner life, a kind of compassionate understanding of themselves and others that would then transmit eventually into political structures. And so I've, found so many people doing this kind of inner work. When I teach courses, people come like this group, Four Corners of the Planet, and I'm always heartened by the beautiful authenticity and sincerity around becoming loving and kind and, relaxing negative patterns. And I think the problem is that there's like a whole underground of people who are engaged in this kind of work that we don't necessarily see the same way. Unfortunately, on the front page, you've got all the folks with the gigantic egos who are just like out of their minds, but we don't have, who also have tremendous impact on the planet, but we don't necessarily see the manifestations of it. So one of the things in the Chief work they talk about as a practice is to notice, number one, okay, there's a lot of crap going down, a lot of systems are breaking down, and at the same time to try to keep a vision of what the ideal is as we become more conscious and work together as a kind and loving humanity. To hold both of them, not to go into la-la land and say, oh, it's not that bad. As Richard Rohr would say, it is that bad. We're looking at fascist movements happening on a grand scale, but also there's many, many people who are working towards a sense of conscious awareness, who are, who will make a difference in the long run. So I remember listening to the Dalai Lama, and they asked him about the world situation. He said, yeah, the world situation's awful, but the good news is in 100 years, this will be handled. So in the meantime, just practice compassion. Just practice compassion. Whoever is closest to you, that's the person you're working with. That's the, so to try not to get so lost in the larger picture, but to just bring that kindness to yourself and those in your circle, that has power, that has unseen effects in the long run, and to keep this conversation alive, because it can be easy when you're on your own to feel like, oh my God, it's like watching a slow motion train wreck, right? It's like, what do I do? What do I do? And my teacher always says, you start with your family, you bring conscious awareness to them, you love them as best you can, you do that in your community, and then you got to do that thing of letting go and letting God and trusting that there is higher guidance, which I believe is true. So anyway, that's my solution until I get lost and have to ask for help.
Okay, wonderful. So now we have time for the next hand.
Oh, Michael, I'm blown away because I'm a big follower of the Enneagram. I'm a graduate of Helen Palmer, and I don't know what that other guy's name, the older man, he passed away, and Peter Hanrahan. This is going back years, but I'm understanding it completely different since we started doing it on this program. And what I'm really interested, I'm a 7. And I have tried everything to be every other number because I hate it.
Well, you got to try.
And I think people, I don't tell people I'm a 7 because it creates a little bit, they nearly kind of walk away. But anyway, what I wanted to find out, we're talking about the patterns, that we go through cycles of expansion. Tell me, just expand a little bit more on the patterns, because I see you've opened up something that I can connect with why I go down into this dip, to the inner workings of that trauma and stuff. And that's just my question today. And I'll definitely be buying your book, and I'll definitely be following you.
Well, so thank you for the question. And I always find type 7s to be a joy to be with. So maybe you're hanging with the wrong crowd. I don't know. The short story on the passions is that the passion is an emotional habit that I develop as a response to experiencing heartbreak as a little boy or a little girl. It's a way that my personality compensates for trying to protect me from a loss I've experienced. And that loss, when we're little boys and little girls, that sense that it's not safe here, that I'm not loved, whatever, however that impression hits a little one, is a freak out. It's deeply painful because, if you hang around healthy kids, like my grandson, Felix, is a type 5. I mean, he's a type 7. He's 5 years old, and he just has this innocent love of everyone and everything. And at some point, he'll get his heart broken. He'll discover that it's not a completely trustable world. Mm-hmm. And when that heart gets broken, there's a way that the personality patterns compensate for the loss of connection with one's heart. And so for the 7, we say that the passion is gluttony. And it's not necessarily such a simple thing, but gluttony is this sense that there's a hole I'm trying to fill inside myself. And I'm driven to different activities to try to fill it. And it's almost like an insatiable hunger that I can't quite feed. It's almost like there's like a baby in the crib who hasn't been fed for 2 days. And there's like some kind of driving mechanism for the 7 until they start to do inner work that has them trying this, that, and the other thing, this experience, that food. We say that 7s know where all the stuff is that can make you feel good, all the tech stuff, all the food stuff, all the entertainment stuff. So a 7 who's had their heart broken has a tendency to go after these things as a way of healing their heart until they learn to slow down and feel that original loss of love that they experienced as a little boy or little girl. And then that requires grieving. And for the type 7s, they say, when I start to go into my grief work, everybody says, cheer up. You're the one who always cheers us up. You can't do this grief work. We need you to cheer us up. And some 7s will say, I have to take a break from my friends because they can't bear to see me go through my own grieving. So
here we go. I'm going to ask a quick question from chat, and we got 2 hands, and I think that'll be our time.
Perfect.
Question in chat is, are we born with this type, or do we develop it as a child?
Well, I can tell you what sort of the theory is, but I would encourage you to find out for yourself. The theory is that we're born with our type, and that based on the level of health of our caregivers, we are able to either access the gifts of the type, or if we're in challenging circumstances, to get identified with the protective patterns of the type. And so it all depends on what kind of welcome our soul has. And of course, we live on planet Earth. There's not too many enlightened people floating around. But nonetheless, the pattern is innate. And this is the theory, that you're born with that pattern in the beginning, and based on your experiences around whether you were nurtured or not, or whatever you went through emotionally, you will develop either variations on the best of the type and the unhealthy pattern. So I know for myself, when I look back, as early as 3 years old, I had the pattern of the type 4. It was there, just in my blood and my soul. Other people sometimes have a hard time remembering, and I would just say it doesn't matter in a lot of ways, that what matters is if you can arrive at what's true for you now in terms of the type. And, at this point, there's no research that verifies that story. So, you're kind of left to your own devices. And do our family members affect us? Yes, of course they do. We even pick up some of their patterns, depending how dominant they are in our lives.
Right. So 2 last questions.
Thank you, Patrick. My question is related to what you just answered about, are we born an Enneatype? I'm thinking I may be an exception to that my Enneatype changed, because I'm really having a hard time figuring out my Enneatype. And as I said in the chat, there's a 2-question Enneatype test that a lot of people, it's working for them. So before I took that, I was a 9, and then I took, by taking other tests. I think one I paid for, and one and then several other were free. So I identified as 9. That was most consistent. I took the 2-question test, before I actually read what the two questions identified, and I came up as a 2. And that didn't really fit. So I looked at the questions. Okay, no, I'm a 9. But then I'm still not sure whether I'm a 9 or a 6, because some people say if you're not sure, then you're probably a 6. But I don't think I'm a 6. And I'm almost done with this story. So I'm going along, am I a 6? Am I a 9? Am I a 2? And then I retook the Enneatype, that 2 question, and I was a 1. So I think the Enneatype Institute said I was a 9. Do you have any comments? Or maybe I just need to find a number
Well,
to.
this would be my assignment to you if I was coaching you, because there's 4 or 5 types that came up. It's not to believe any of it as being who you are, but let's say you had the book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram. I would say read each type and highlight where you identify with the description. And after you've done that with those 4 types, you're going to see that there's 1 or 2 that are dominant. And then begin the practice of observing one of those types at a time for a month to see if you fit that pattern. And you will narrow that down to the one that's you.
Oh, thank you. What was the name of that book?
Wisdom of the Enneagram.
Okay, thank you.
Last but not least.
Previously, Michael, in your talk, you mentioned the predicted emergence of shadow in 2020. And clearly, I think worldwide, there has been an emergence of shadow in the previous decade and in this decade. Who predicted that? Is that mentioned in this Wisdom of the Enneagram book, or where did you get that? And does past experience with the emergence of shadows, such as maybe back at World War I or World War II, does past experience give an indication of how long the Earth stays in shadow based on the behavior of human beings?
Well, that question I can't answer, but a good reference is the book by Eckhart Tolle called Towards a New Earth. And he talks about this kind of evolutionary movement that we're experiencing right now. So he lays it out quite clearly in a lot of ways. The other person who does it is somebody named J.G. Bennett. And you'd have to go to the Bennett Foundation, on the internet. But he's done, he did talks in 1977, said, 50 years from now, the way the planet's evolving is a tendency towards destroying the ecology, for concentrating power in the hands of a very small group of people, a slow annihilation of personal rights. That's the tide that's coming. And the purpose of it is ultimately, to demonstrate how it doesn't work at all, so that people really get in their veins that this system of capitalism and concentration of wealth harms everyone, including the 1%. So he said it's just a part of a kind of lawful evolution. Is it an easy evolution? No, it is not. There will be a lot of suffering, but the invitation is to do your own inner work so that you're in a place to be able to intuitively grasp what your role is, your small role. So what my teacher always says to me is, Michael, you are one cell in the body of humanity, and your job is to purify your cell. And as you do that, it will touch other people. But, that's where your work is. And to know that that's really a powerful place to work. So that would be my answer for now.